You ever camp deep in the Appalachian Mountains? I mean really deep? Off trail, no cell service, where the trees grow so thick they block the moonlight? Well, if you haven't, these stories might make sure you never do. In tonight's video, we're diving into 10 true tales of Appalachian camping trips that went horribly wrong. Some ended in confusion, some in terror, and some are still unanswered to this day. Before we begin, tap that like button. It helps this story reach more horror lovers like you. Comment where you're watching from. Every viewer here is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family is watching from tonight. And after you've heard them all, let me know which story messed you up the most. Finally, subscribe. Your subscribe gives huge support to this channel and helps us keep bringing you terrifying stories week after week. Now, let's begin. I grew up not far from War, West Virginia, so the ridges above town were familiar, but I hadn't camped there in years. My friends Tyler and Grant wanted a quick weekend escape. Nothing fancy, just a couple nights under the trees. We parked at an old pull-off where the gravel had bled into weeds and hiked a mile or so up a muddy ridgeline. By dusk, we'd cleared a small patch beneath a cluster of oaks. The ground smelled damp like rotting leaves and wet bark. The first night passed quietly enough. A light drizzle tapped against our tents. I remember waking once to coyotes yipping far down in the hollow. Their sound carried thin and broken through the fog. By morning, the ground was soft but not soaked, and our boots collected streaks of black mud. We spent most of the day wandering old trails that crumbled off into brush, circling rust-eaten hunting blinds, and breathing air that always seemed 2 degrees heavier than it should have been. It was the second night when I noticed it. We had just settled by the fire. Nothing big, just a weak flame chewing damp sticks. Off through the trees, about 200 feet away, I caught a patch of blue against the gray. A tent. Faded, almost gray itself, but I could see the sagging dome shape. No fire, no movement. Just still fabric clinging to the outline of poles. Somebody else out here? I muttered half to myself. Tyler turned, squinting into the trees. Didn't see anyone hiking. Grant just shrugged. Lot of old camps up here. Probably left behind, but it didn't look abandoned. The fabric hadn't collapsed. The rain from last night should have pooled on the top, but it looked taut, like someone had been there recently. We talked about walking over, but no one did. The ridge between was steep, and night was already rolling in. When I woke in the gray of morning, the tent was gone. Not collapsed or shredded, just gone. I got up before the others, stretching my legs in the mist. My eyes went straight to where I'd seen it. Only trees, ground matted with dead leaves. But back at our own site, the dirt told a different story. Boot prints, dozens of them, pressed deep in the wet ground, circling our tents, some crossing close enough that the tread pattern stood out clear. None of us owned boots. We wore trail shoes, flat, smooth, nothing like these wide-heeled prints with their deep-cut lugs. When the others crawled out, I pointed at the tracks. Tyler went pale. Grant tried to laugh it off, but his eyes didn't match his voice. The fire pit was cold ash, though we'd buried embers under a log before bed. Whoever had walked here hadn't bothered to hide it. The strangest part, the ground where that blue tent had stood was bone dry. No mud, no impressions, just leaves lying crisp like the rain had never touched them. None of us said it out loud, but the air around camp felt different, tight, watched. The morning stayed silent except for the wet drip of fog loosening from branches. By noon we had already agreed. One more night, then we'd head down. But even then I couldn't stop staring at the tree line, waiting for a flash of blue. That last night pressed heavier than the others. The fog didn't move like it usually did. It hung low and stubborn, muffling every sound until the fire crackle felt too loud. We didn't talk much. None of us wanted to bring up the prints again. Still, I couldn't let it go. After Tyler and Grant zipped into their tents, I sat awake watching shadows shift. The woods looked wrong, like the trees were closer than before. At some point I heard it. Not footsteps, not twigs breaking, just a slow shift of weight in the leaves. A presence more than a sound. I lit the last of my firewood, flames licking high. In that light I saw something tucked under a rock near the edge of camp. Fabric. I went to it and pulled out a corner of faded blue nylon, damp and frayed. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a whole tent, just a cut-off piece, dirty but unmistakable. Someone had stuffed it under the stone, hidden it right beside us. The unease turned sharp after that. Every gust of wind seemed to carry breath. I didn't sleep. Morning came slow and gray. When I finally unzipped my tent, I saw Tyler crouched at the fire pit staring. The ground around it had changed. Boot prints again, fresher, sharper, pressed right over where we'd sat. Grant came out cursing, holding his pack. The zippers had been undone. Not torn, just opened neatly. Food bags were gone. His flashlight, too. Nothing else touched. We packed in silence, eyes scanning the ridge. None of us argued about leaving early anymore. The hike down felt wrong. Trails we'd taken up seemed longer. At one bend, I swore I smelled smoke, though no cabins stood for miles. Once, I caught a flash of blue ahead, tucked between trees, but when I blinked, it was only fog. Back at the car, mud streaked the doors. Prints again, heavy and deliberate. We drove without stopping, winding down into war where rusted trailers slouched against hillsides and dogs barked from chains. Only once we hit the main road did I breathe steady again. That night, alone in my apartment, I kept replaying it. The dry ground where the tent had been, the prints circling ours, the missing food. Whoever was out there, they hadn't just been passing through. They'd been close, watching. I still see those tracks when I close my eyes, wide-heeled, deep-cut, circling slow. And every time I drive near those ridges, I glance at the tree line, searching for a faded patch of blue, wondering if, even now, someone is standing just beyond sight, waiting for the fog to roll in. I've never liked the woods at night. I was raised in Logan County, West Virginia, surrounded by forest, but even as a kid, there was something about the trees after dark. The way they close in, hold the air still, hide the sound of your own breath. But I agreed to the trip. Josh had been pushing for weeks, and I said he found a trail on an old forestry map, unmaintained but legal. Off-grid but not illegal, he'd said with a grin. He picked the spot somewhere above Bradshaw, near the old county line where the pines choke the ridgeline so thick, you barely see sky. We parked near a broken gate and hiked in until we saw a crooked wooden sign, a trailhead. Marker stuck into a slope of moss and shale. It had no name, just a hand-carved arrow pointing forward, even though there wasn't a trail. Not really, we camped nearby, just off to the side where the ground dipped and held a bit of rainwater. The soil was soft and dark. The air smelled like bark rot and crushed fern. We set up our 2 tents, small fire, kept things simple. By nightfall, fog crept in. Not fast, just slow tendrils curling low along the ground. The kind that doesn't move with wind, the kind that settles. We talked less as it got darker. Not out of fear, just silence. Even Josh got quiet. No birds, no insects. The only sound was the faint crack of branches somewhere uphill. I turned in around midnight, zipped into my bag, listening to the wind brush the tent fabric. It was calm. Until around 3 a.m., I woke up to whispering. Not voices, not language. Just the sound of breath, low and hushed like someone exhaling against tree bark. It wasn't coming from far. It was right outside. I held still. The whispering kept going. Always the same tone, same rhythm. Never words. I finally worked up the nerve to unzip the tent slow as I could. The moment the zipper moved, it stopped. Dead silence. I scanned the trees. Nothing. Just fog and the faint glow of cooling embers from our fire. I didn't sleep much after that. By morning, Josh was already up, standing near the trailhead marker. "What the hell?" he said, half under his breath. The sign had been chopped in half. Not cracked, not rotted, cleanly split down the post with something sharp. The arrowhead was gone. Just a jagged stump left, no tracks. No tire marks. I went back to the tent to pack. That's when I saw it, on the back of my sleeping bag, where it had bunched against the floor during the night. A muddy handprint, smudged, human. Pressed hard enough to flatten the fabric, but the rest of the tent was clean. I called Josh over, showed him. He didn't say much, just looked at it, nodded once, and stepped back. We didn't pack up right away. I think both of us expected something else to happen. Some explanation. But the longer we waited, the heavier the woods felt, and that whispering, it stayed in the back of my mind like an echo that never stopped. We stayed one more night. I don't know why. Maybe pride. Maybe we didn't want to admit we were spooked by something we couldn't explain. Josh tried to rebuild the fire marker, propping the broken post back into the dirt. It just fell again. The clean cut on the wood looked too precise. Not like someone using a pocket knife, more like a fresh blade, maybe even a saw. Around dusk, I walked the edge of where the arrow had pointed. Still no trail. Just undergrowth, dense pine needles, rocks slick with moss. But if you looked close, and I mean really close, you could see something strange. A kind of indent, almost like a footpath. Not wide enough for a person. Narrow. Animal, maybe. But it stretched off into the brush in a straight line. Back at camp, Josh had laid out his gear to dry. His sleeping bag was damp with something that didn't smell like rain. When I asked about it, he said it must have been runoff. But it looked like sweat. That night, the air didn't move. No wind, no insects, just that thick, stagnant pressure that makes your ears ring. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the trees made me tighten my fists. Around 2:30, I sat up and unzipped the tent quietly. The coals had long gone cold, but there was light. A faint orange glow maybe 100 yards deeper into the woods. It flickered like firelight, calm but too low, too steady. I stepped out barefoot, stupid. But I didn't move closer. I just watched. The light pulsed once, then went out. I turned back. Josh was outside his tent now, crouched, staring at something. "What is it?" I asked. He just pointed. There, pressed into the mud near the trailhead marker, was a second handprint. This one smaller, but deeper. Fingers splayed wide. The two prints, mine from the sleeping bag and this one, didn't match. We packed at first light. The silence didn't break until we hit gravel. Neither of us talked on the drive back. I still have the bag. I kept it in storage for a year before I finally threw it out. The handprint never faded even after it dried. Sometimes I dream about that whispering. Not hearing it, but feeling it. The pressure of it. Like breath against the back of my neck. Josh doesn't hike anymore. Last time we spoke, he said he doesn't even camp in his backyard. I still don't know what it was. Person. Animal. Something else. But here's the part I can't let go of. A few months later, I went back to look. Just to check, the trail marker was gone. Not broken, removed. Nothing left but a square hole in the dirt. But 30 feet past where it had stood, the trees were cleared. A path had been cut. Straight. Narrow. Clean. And it went deep. Far deeper than I was ever willing to follow. I've camped in the Appalachians all my life. Born in Boone, raised between ridges and hollows. I grew up knowing that once the sun drops and the fog rolls in, you keep close to firelight. It's not superstition. It's just what the woods can do to your senses out here. This trip wasn't meant to be anything serious. Just a weekend with my younger cousin Reese. He'd just finished a rough semester and wanted a break. No phones, no traffic, just trees and sleep. We picked a clearing near Hensley Branch, not far from War, West Virginia. We'd found the spot years ago while deer hunting with my uncle. Back then it was just an open patch near a crumbled logging road and a half-collapsed shed. Still is. By early evening, the fog was already coming in. Not unusual, just earlier than expected. Thick and wet. It clung low to the ground, swallowing our boots when we walked. The kind that beads on your arms and makes your jacket smell like mildew the next day. I was setting up the tent while Reese gathered firewood. I remember watching the fog creep between the trees like it knew where it was going. I stepped out toward the tree line for a last armload of kindling. Didn't go far. Maybe 30 yards. Enough to hear Reese humming softly near the fire pit. That's when I saw him, a man, standing just beside our fire, motionless. Head lowered slightly, arms loose at his sides. Clothes soaked through. His jacket was dark with water, the fabric clinging tight like he'd been out in the rain for hours. He faced the fire like it was his, like we were the ones intruding. I froze where I stood. We hadn't seen anyone else all day. No hikers, no vehicles, not even deer scat. This place wasn't exactly on a trail. I called out, voice sharp, "Hey, you okay?" The man turned toward me, and that's when I realized something was wrong. His face, it was off. Not grotesque, not disfigured, just wrong, like it was blurred behind a wet window. The features didn't hold. Nose, mouth, eyes, all seemed to shift slightly, like my eyes couldn't get a grip on them. Like a photo left out in the rain. I blinked, and he was gone. No rustling. No footsteps, nothing. Just Reese at the fire now, looking at me like I'd dropped something. "You good?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at the damp spot where the man had stood. The fire cracked softly, but nothing else moved, no prints. No steam rising from wet clothes. Just fire and fog and the quiet hiss of damp leaves drying. Reese thought maybe I'd just imagined it. Shadows in the fog, tricks of light. He laughed it off at first, but I could tell from the way he kept glancing into the dark that it got under his skin too. We stayed close to the fire that night. Didn't wander, didn't cook anything. Just sat with our backs toward the woods, listening. Around midnight, Reese went quiet, staring past me. I turned and saw nothing but fog and the outline of the old shed 100 feet off. He muttered something I didn't catch. What? I asked. He hesitated. Nothing. Thought I saw someone standing by that roof line. He didn't say it like a joke. I didn't laugh. We didn't sleep well. I dozed maybe an hour before I woke again. Not to sound, to absence. No breeze, no insects, no drip from trees. Just that hollow silence that presses against your chest when something's too still. The fire had burned down to coals. I checked the perimeter again. Nothing. But when I turned to crawl back into my tent, I saw it. My backpack, zipped, sealed, dry inside the vestibule hours ago, was soaked through. I opened it. Every item inside was dry. Except one, my flannel shirt. The one I hadn't worn. It was balled tight and soaked, as if someone had dunked it in creek water. Not muddy. Just cold, wet, no water anywhere else. No puddles in the vestibule. Just the shirt. Like it had been carried off and brought back. Reese stirred behind me. You went through my pack? I asked. He mumbled, half asleep. What? Never mind. Morning took its time coming. By dawn, the fog had lightened slightly, just enough to see the outline of the old shed more clearly. Something about it pulled at me. I walked over alone. The door hung half off the hinges, rusted nails poking through splintered wood. Inside it smelled of mold and iron. Rotten paper curled on the floor, old game tags, license slips, broken jars, and in the far corner, sitting upright against the wall, was a coat. A soaked, heavy, dark coat, still wet. Not mildew wet, freshly soaked. Dripping slowly onto the dusty floorboards, I stepped closer and saw the boots below it. Set perfectly side by side. Caked with mud. Appalachian mud. The kind with that reddish tinge you only get around Hensley Branch. And just above the boots, 2 faint, wet outlines, as if someone had been sitting there all night, back pressed to the wall. Watching through the missing slats, I didn't take pictures. I didn't call Reese over. I just left. We packed up without speaking. Reese never asked why I didn't say goodbye that morning. I think he knew. I haven't camped since. Sometimes I still think about the man by the fire. Not his face, and because I couldn't see it, but his posture. The stillness. Like he'd always been there, and we were just passing through his place. But what gets me most is something I read later that winter. A single line in a book about forest search and rescue procedures. Soaked clothes aren't always a sign of weather. Sometimes it's the absence of shelter that leaves things wet. I keep wondering if I interrupted something that night, or if I was meant to see him, or if someone somewhere is still drying off my shirt. I camp alone a lot, partly out of habit, partly by choice. I find it easier to think when I'm away from people. No phones, no headlights, no expectations. Just the woods, the wind, and whatever's waiting in the silence. This trip was meant to be a reset. I'd taken some time off work. Too much stress, too many nights waking up without knowing why. Spruce Knob felt far enough. I'd hiked parts of the Monongahela back in college, but never this deep. That upper ridge beyond Seneca Creek? Most folks don't bother climbing past the switchbacks, but I wanted the distance. By late afternoon, I'd found a soft patch of ground a few miles past the last blaze mark. Slight dip ringed by thick firs, moss everywhere. The air smelled like old bark and damp stone. I pitched my one-person tent just before the fog started slipping in. Heavy stuff, the kind that clings low and quiet, so even your breath feels like it's moving through water. I made a small fire, ate, listened to the wind brush the treetops. By 9 p.m., everything went still. The stillness wasn't peaceful. It was expectant. Like something was waiting for me to close my eyes. I must have fallen asleep around 10. I remember the heat from the fire fading, the tent cooling, that usual weight of sleep pressing down, and then scratching, not frantic, not clawing, just dragging a soft, deliberate tracing sound, coming from underneath me, beneath the tent floor. My first thought was roots shifting, maybe something digging, but it didn't sound random. It sounded patterned, slow, continuous loops, circles. I froze, listening. The sound didn't stop. It just kept drawing, over and over, like someone pressing a stick through the soil, never lifting it. I reached for my flashlight, clicked it on. The tent lit up in dull yellow. Silence. The sound stopped the instant light hit the fabric. I waited. Nothing. I unzipped the front flap. Cold air swept in. Fog curled low outside, dense and motionless. There was nothing there. No animal. No prints, no sound of scurrying feet. Just trees barely visible. Still, I stepped out, crouched low and peeled the tent floor back. That's when I saw them. Drawn into the dirt, covering the entire footprint of the tent. Stick figures. Hundreds of them. Some no larger than a thumbprint. Others stretching almost the length of my arm. All scratched shallow into the earth, like someone used a dull twig or a fingernail. Each figure was just a rough body and limbs. No faces, but everyone was standing alone. No overlap, no groupings, just figures, watching something I couldn't see. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't leave either. Because at that point, I didn't know what was worse, staying or running into something worse in the fog. Dawn didn't come easily. The light arrived slow and gray, filtered through heavy clouds that didn't lift. Everything stayed wet. The fire pit was a shallow bowl of ash and mud. I told myself to pack and hike back and cut the trip short. But I didn't. Something made me linger. Some need to understand. To find reason in what I'd seen. I walked about a quarter mile out, looping uphill to see if maybe someone else had been camped nearby. No footprints, no gear. Just soft pine needles and thick moss. The only marks I saw were my own. Back at camp, I noticed something else. More stick figures. Just beyond where the tent had been, scattered lightly across the moss, etched into rocks, carved faintly into bark. Most of them were half erased by dew, but a few were new, fresher. I told myself maybe I hadn't noticed them the night before. Maybe they'd been there all along, but the ground under my tent had been flat, clean. I would have felt those ridges under my bag and the new figures. They were facing a different direction. Facing me. Around noon, I found a small alcove behind a tree, not a cave, just an indent in the hillside. Inside were shards of old bone. Not animal, not human, just pieces, scattered, clean. Next to them sat a flat river stone, no larger than a dinner plate, and on it, one stick figure, carved deep, alone, limbs stretched wide like it had been pulled in 4 directions. A single vertical scratch ran through its center. I didn't touch it. I don't know why. I felt watched the rest of the day, not actively, just like something remembered me being there. By nightfall, I had my gear packed tight. I didn't cook, didn't drink, just sat with my back against a tree, flashlight in hand, waiting for the dark to come. It came heavy. The fog returned thicker than before. I stayed awake. Sometime after midnight, the scratching returned. This time not beneath me, but around me. On bark, on stone. A slow circular dragging, like drawing again and again. I didn't turn the light on. I just sat there, listening. Eventually, it stopped. I hiked out before dawn. The trail felt longer on the way back. The trees leaned closer. I passed an old forestry post I don't remember seeing on the way up. Rusted and bent, barely legible. Back home, I washed the tent. Scrubbed the floor, but no matter what I did, the faint lines never fully came out. The outline of one figure, just one, is still there, pressed into the fabric like it soaked through. Sometimes I hear that sound in my dreams, the slow scratch of something drawing endlessly right beneath me, and I wonder if I left when I did, or if I stayed too long. It was supposed to be a weekend to clear our heads. Just me and Connor, old friends, tired of city noise and cell reception. We took off Friday morning, heading south out of Elkins, weaving through the Monongahela until we found an old Forest Service road that looked barely passable. No signs, no markings, just cracked gravel vanishing into pine. About 3 miles in, the road narrowed until branches scraped both sides of the truck. We stopped where the road gave up, walked another half-mile until the ridge dipped into a basin filled with wet leaves and dead silence. That's where we found the camp. At first glance, it looked like any old hunter's spot. Half-burned logs circled in stone, torn green tarp pinned against a crooked tree, a busted cooler cracked along the hinge like it had been slammed too hard. The gear was old but not ancient. 10 years, maybe less. But what made us stop? What made Connor actually laugh, uneasy and dry, was the lantern. An old Coleman, the kind with the green tank and metal top. It sat just inside the circle of stones, glowing, no flicker. No hiss, no visible flame, just a steady amber light, maybe solar, Connor said, squatting to look closer. But there was no panel, no battery pack, no heat coming off it either. I tapped the tank. Hollow, cold. We left it there. I didn't like the look of it. We pitched our own tent about 100 feet upslope, still close enough to watch the fire pit, but far enough that I didn't have to look at that damn glow. It stayed on all night, just sitting there, lighting up nothing. The forest was silent. No crickets, no owls. Even the breeze felt muted. Fog drifted low around midnight, turning the trees into shapes. I kept checking the lantern through the mesh flap. Still glowing. In the morning, the light was gone. The lantern was still there, sitting where we'd found it. But the lens was dark, the tank still empty. We packed slowly. Neither of us spoke much. Something about the whole place felt off. Like it had been disturbed, then left wrong. We were nearly ready to leave when Connor stopped. "Do you see that?" he asked. Downhill, maybe 500 feet through the trees, something hanging. I followed his finger. Another lantern. Same kind, old Coleman. Dangling from a low pine branch. Glowing, still lit. Connor said my name, but I was already walking. The second lantern wasn't hanging high, maybe 6 feet off the ground. Swung slightly with the breeze. No noise, no gas smell. Just that quiet light, steady and amber, lighting up the bark around it. I reached out but didn't touch it. There were marks beneath the tree. Not footprints exactly. More like deep scuffs, like someone had twisted their boots into the wet ground over and over. The soil was black with moisture, disturbed. Something had stood here. Maybe for hours. Connor hung back. "We should go," he said. I nodded. We turned and started walking back toward the truck, but the forest felt heavier now. Trees too close. Fog thicker than before. Our gear, our tent, our packs, and were still up the hill, but as we walked, the landscape shifted. Nothing looked familiar, and then we found it. Another campfire ring. Same stone pattern. Same half-burned logs. Same broken cooler. Same tarp. But this time wrapped tighter around the tree. Pinned with rocks like someone tried to hold it closed. No lantern. Just the smell of damp earth and rust. I walked around the edge of the site, heart thudding. That wasn't our gear, but it wasn't not ours either. Same layout. Same position near the slope. Connor kept saying my name, but I didn't answer, because that's when I noticed something sticking out of the dirt. I dug with my hand. Soft soil, recently disturbed. Just under the surface, I found a boot. Worn leather, laces still tied. Not old enough to rot, just abandoned. Inside it, something rattled. I tipped it over. A small round Coleman lantern knob. The kind you twist to release pressure. No one said anything after that. We climbed back toward where we thought we'd left our gear. We didn't find it. The forest had shifted. Trails curled back into themselves. A branch I'd broken hours earlier was now whole. We walked until our legs burned. Found the service road by dumb luck. Not where we left it, but running parallel to a creek that hadn't been there before. The truck was there, half covered in pollen. Though we hadn't been gone more than a night, we didn't speak the whole drive back. 2 days later, I opened my pack and found a small metal cap tucked into the side pocket. I hadn't put it there. It was worn, circular, and smelled faintly of kerosene. I keep it on my desk now. I don't know why. Sometimes I wake up and the room feels too dim, like something's glowing faintly just out of view. Like I left a light on somewhere deep in the woods. Something I was never supposed to see, and I keep thinking about the lanterns, not what they were, but what they were meant to light. There were 4 of us on that trip. Me, Cal, Mason, and Tyler. We'd been talking about it since spring. A late summer escape, somewhere remote enough that we couldn't check our phones even if we wanted to. Mason found the spot, an unmarked trail off a Forest Service road near Dunmore, West Virginia. Eastern slope of Cheat Mountain, not far from the Shaver's Fork. We hiked in about 5 miles until the path just vanished. The woods got dense, ground soft and uneven. But we found a clearing ringed by birch trees, mostly flat, with a slight ridge that dropped off to a quiet hollow. We set up camp and built a small fire. By the time the sun dipped, the fog rolled in heavy, the kind that beads on your jacket and dulls your hearing. The only sounds were the slow drip of moisture from the canopy and the occasional snap of a twig under something unseen. Mason brought one of those cheap walkie-talkie sets, still in the blister pack. Said it'd be fun to use them at night, maybe freak each other out. He tossed me one while we sat around the fire. They barely had any range, but we played with them a bit, whispering nonsense back and forth, static crackling through the trees. It was harmless enough. By midnight, the fire was down to coals and we all turned in. I remember zipping my sleeping bag, hearing Tyler cough a few tents over, and then just quiet. I must have dozed off for an hour, maybe two. Then the walkie-talkie clicked on. Shh. A pause. Then a voice. "I cold up here, huh?" It didn't sound like any of us. The voice was too dry, older, weathered, like someone trying to speak through chapped lips. Not playful, not joking, just quiet, observational. "Cold up here, huh?" That was it. Then static again. Then nothing. I sat up, heart knocking in my chest, unzipped the flap and scanned the campsite. No lights, no movement, fog thick enough to smear the trees. I reached for the button, whispered "Mason" into the walkie, no reply. Just dead silence. I tried again. Nothing. I clicked it off and back on. Dead. The battery light was still green, but the unit felt cold in my hand. The next morning, nobody mentioned it. I thought maybe it had been one of them screwing around. Maybe Mason tried to spook me and didn't want to own up. But when I asked casually if the radios still worked, Mason shook his head. "They're toast," he said. "Both of them. Weird, right?" He flipped one over in his hand and showed me the inside. No rust, no water damage. Just dead. We didn't talk about it after that. Packed up and hiked out the next morning. But I kept thinking about that voice, not what it said. Just the way it said it. Like someone who'd been listening for a long time. Back in town, I took the radios home with me. I didn't mean to. Just found them stuffed in the side pocket of my pack when I unpacked the next day. They still had battery charge. Lights blinked, but they wouldn't transmit or receive. Just static. I tried resetting them. Nothing. Later that week, I took them to a buddy of mine who works with ham radios. He cracked one open on his workbench, tested the circuitry. "They're not broken," he said. "They're just blank. Like something wiped them." He handed it back with a look I didn't like. The kind people give when they feel something wrong but can't explain it. That night I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, just restlessness. Around 2 a.m. I clicked the walkie on one more time. Just habit, no sound. I turned to set it down when I heard a faint click, then a long, slow breath. Not words, just air. Drawing in, holding, then letting go. I turned it off and put it in a drawer. Didn't touch it again. The next time I saw Cal, I brought it up. Not directly, just hinted around it. "You remember that night up on the ridge?" I asked. He looked up from his coffee. "The radio thing?" He said it casually, but his jaw clenched when he said it. Like he hadn't talked about it since, but it had been sitting in his mind the whole time. I nodded. He didn't elaborate. Just said, "Didn't sound like us," and left it at that. Mason and Tyler both dropped out of group chats not long after. Not suddenly. Just faded. Stopped replying. Neither one camped again that season. Me? I still hike. Still go out. But I haven't brought a radio since. And sometimes when I'm out late, just past dark, right before the fog starts, I get this urge to say something out loud. Like someone's waiting to hear me on the other end. I never do. But I still remember the voice. Not mocking, not cruel. Just cold. Like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. But was. It didn't start in the woods. That's what makes this so hard to explain. Nothing happened out there. No noises in the dark. No strange figures. No bad dreams. The trip itself was uneventful, even boring. We camped on a flat rise above Mill Creek, southeast of Elkins, West Virginia. Me, Jeff, and Carter, all in our 30s now, trying to hang on to the kind of friendships that usually dissolve after college. We wanted remoteness, quiet, and we got it. 3 nights of cheap whiskey, bad jokes, and cold sleep. The air stayed damp. Fog hung low every morning, lifting just enough by noon to make us feel like the forest had reluctantly allowed us in. The moss was thick, the ground soft, the creek nearby slow and brown. We left no trace, packed everything out. None of us said anything strange happened. But the feeling started after we got back. The day after specifically, Jeff was the first to mention it. A screenshot sent to the group chat. Unknown number, 38.7543, 79.62 no text. Just coordinates. He thought it was spam, but curiosity got the better of him. He punched it into Google Maps. The pin dropped on the exact spot we'd camped. Carter laughed it off. Said maybe Jeff had accidentally dropped a pin and forgot. But a few hours later, Carter got the same message. Then I did. Same number. Same coordinates, still no text. No contact name. Just a location. At first, I told myself someone we'd passed on the road had picked up our license plates and was messing with us. But we hadn't seen a soul, and nobody knew we were going there. It wasn't on any trail maps. Carter had found it using some old Forest Service overlay. We stopped responding to each other after that. Not intentionally. Just drifted, like we each hoped ignoring it would make it stop. Then 3 days later, the coordinates changed, not by much. Just enough to be noticeable. The new location was still deep in the woods, but not where we'd camped. It had shifted maybe 300 yards downslope. Carter texted me, "Why is it moving?" I didn't answer. The morning after that, I checked again. New coordinates. Closer to the road now. Like it was crawling west. I stared at the pin for a long time. Something about it unsettled me. The quiet precision of it. No explanation, no claim. Just a place. And the way it kept moving. By the end of the week, the pin was showing a location just outside of Elkins, on a turnout along a service road I recognized, not far from where I used to go fly fishing as a kid. That's when I made the decision to go back, alone. Not because I was scared. I was angry. It felt like someone was playing a joke, and a sick one, and I needed to prove to myself it wasn't real. I loaded up my truck and drove out on a Thursday. By the time I hit the forest road again, the sky had clouded over and the hills were coughing up fog. Everything felt damp, muffled, like sound didn't carry here. I parked just off the gravel, boots crunching against wet leaves, pulled out my phone, opened the message sheet 7561796238I, punched it in again, and that's when I realized the coordinates weren't where I'd been. They were now where I was standing. I stood there longer than I should have, not scared, not yet. Just confused. Checking the numbers again. Refreshing the app, but the pin stayed centered, right where I was. I walked up the trail a few yards, watched the map update. The pin followed. Not in real time, but close. I turned off location services, disabled the app, then turned it back on, still tracking me. I looked up at the trees. Just fog and bare limbs, no drone, no sound. I told myself I was being paranoid. Someone had hacked my phone maybe, or a GPS glitch. But it didn't feel like a glitch, it felt intentional. I kept hiking. Against my better judgment, I went back to the original site. Our old campfire ring was still there, scattered with damp stones. The ash had washed away, but someone had moved things. A half circle of sticks had been placed around where my tent had been, neatly arranged like a marking. A plastic zip tie lay near one of them. Not ours, not weathered, still clean. I felt my chest tighten. I called Jeff, straight to voicemail. Same with Carter. I turned to go back. Took the trail fast, then broke into a jog. Slipped twice, wet leaves, uneven roots. My legs ached by the time I reached the turnout again, but the truck wasn't there. I stood where I'd parked, leaves disturbed, tire marks fading. But no vehicle, no sound, no wind. Just the soft hiss of fog against fabric. I opened the map app again. The pin had moved now. It was behind me. I turned. The woods looked the same. I didn't wait. I walked the service road for nearly 2 hours before I got a single bar of signal, enough to ping roadside assistance. I told them I'd been hiking, left the truck elsewhere, lied mostly to myself. When they found it the next day, it was parked exactly where I'd left it. No signs of tampering. Keys still in my pack. I haven't heard from Carter or Jeff since. They stopped posting. Phones go straight to voicemail. I still get the coordinates. New ones every few days. Each one a little closer to whatever stretch of road I happen to be near. I've changed phones twice. Factory reset both. It doesn't matter. The messages keep coming. No name, no sound, just a place. And lately, that place is always wherever I am. We were only supposed to be out for the afternoon. Me, Cal, and Nate. Old friends, mid-30s, trying to claw back some kind of connection after years of jobs and distance. We picked a ridge near Cass, West Virginia. Nothing serious. Just a day hike with a view and maybe a beer around the fire before heading back to town. The ridge trail we followed was narrow and choked with rhododendron, but manageable. Fog drifted between the trees in thin curtains. Not enough to obscure the trail, just enough to make the light feel flat and heavy. We'd set a small fire around noon and left our packs there while we explored. Didn't expect to go far, but when Cal spotted what looked like an old game trail cutting steep down into a hollow, we followed. "No way this shows up on all trails," he said, grinning. The trail wasn't marked, but there were signs of use. Bare patches, boot divots, broken twigs. It sloped fast, and we had to grab roots and saplings just to keep from sliding. We'd all checked our watches around the same time, more out of habit than anything. 8 p.m. I remember it because mine buzzed. Low battery. Nate called out a joke about beating sunset. We figured it'd take 10 minutes down, 15 back up. But it didn't feel like 10 minutes. Something about the air changed near the bottom. Heavier, still, and the silence. The deeper we went, the quieter everything got. No birds, no bugs. Just the scrape of our boots and the sound of our own breathing. We reached the base, a muddy clearing with a few stone slabs, maybe old foundation blocks. We walked a slow loop. Nothing of note. Nate said he felt dizzy. Cal kept checking his phone, but it wouldn't load signal. Mine was dead by then, we didn't stay long. Didn't want to lose the light, but the climb back up felt wrong. Longer, heavier. We had to stop more than we should have. Legs shaking, lungs tight like the air didn't have enough in it. When we finally crested the ridge and saw our gear, the sky was wrong, too dim, too orange. Cal checked his watch, then frowned. 7:10. Nate pulled his phone. No way, but it was. Past 7 p.m. Sun dipping hard behind the hills. Cold air setting in. We stood there in disbelief. We'd only been gone 20 minutes. 30 at most? Then I noticed the fire. We'd buried the coals before leaving. Fully cold. No smoke, but now it was burning again, not big. Just a soft flame licking the edge of a split log. The same log we'd set hours ago, and no one had matches out. None of us said anything right away. The fire snapped softly like it had been stoked by a careful hand. Nate knelt and poked at it. The underside of the log was dry and blackened, just like we left it. But the top was fresh lit. Flame dancing like someone had relit it maybe 10 minutes ago. Maybe. Wind caught it again? He said, but he didn't sound convinced. There was no wind. Not even a breeze. We sat for a few minutes, not speaking. The woods had gone quiet again. Dense, like sound didn't carry. When we finally packed up, I noticed something else. My watch was still frozen at 3:08 p.m. dead screen. Wouldn't reset. Cal's was the same. Nate's too. We didn't talk on the hike out. It wasn't fear exactly. More like unease settling into bone. We made it back to the truck. Hit the highway. Ate in silence at a diner just outside Durban. We barely looked at each other. Back home, things didn't sit right. I kept waking at night. Same time, every time, 3:08 a.m. The digital clock next to my bed would be glowing always that time. It'd stay frozen for exactly 1 minute, then click over like nothing happened. I didn't tell Cal or Nate at first. I thought I was imagining it, but then Cal sent a picture to the group chat, his microwave clock. 8, frozen. He said it had happened 3 nights in a row. Always when he woke up sweating. No dreams, just a lingering sense of pressure in the room, like something had been crouched nearby watching. Nate finally broke his silence. Said he hadn't slept at all since the trip, not because of the time, because of a noise. He described it like kindling being snapped in a fire pit, over and over. Always just after midnight. He lived in a condo in Pittsburgh. No trees nearby. None of us wanted to reconnect again. Not in person. It just faded after that. No arguments. Just distance. I still have the pack from that trip. Haven't touched it since, but sometimes when I walk past the closet, I swear I catch a faint scent of campfire. Not smoke exactly. Just the chemical memory of flame and sap and something burned too long. Last week, I pulled up the coordinates of that trail. I traced our route, followed the ridgeline. I couldn't find the ravine. I know it was there. I felt it under my feet, the way it pulled us in, the silence at the bottom, the weight of it. But now it's just contour lines, no cuts, no slope, just trees. I don't sleep much anymore, not because I'm scared. I'm just waiting to feel that moment again. When time stops, when the forest holds its breath, when something you thought was behind you decides it's not done yet. We set up camp off a forestry spur road about 20 minutes south of Richwood, West Virginia. Me, Derek, and Milo, all in our early 30s, trying to hang on to something from the years before mortgages and back pain. It was mid-October, cold enough that your fingers went stiff when you worked the tent poles too long. Fog had already started to drift in from the lower hollows by the time we'd finished building a fire. The place was quiet, thick pine woods, wet earth, and that smell you only get out here. Smoke, mud, distant rot. We weren't far off the gravel, but it felt isolated. No reception. No trails marked on the map. Just a slight clearing on a ridge used maybe once or twice by hunters. We found an old beer can near a stump. Deer tracks, maybe bear. Nothing recent. Derek had brought his GoPro, one of the newer ones with the auto record feature and a 360-degree field. He clipped it to a low branch pointing at camp. Said he wanted a time-lapse of the fire and our tents glowing under the stars. We'd just finished eating when it happened. The woods had gone quiet. Not unusual. Just that dense, low-pressure silence before night pulls in fully. You could hear the fire popping, the weight of wood shifting in the coals. That's when we saw her, a little girl, maybe 7, 8 years old, walking barefoot into the glow of our campfire. She wore a red hoodie thin enough to be soaked at the hem. Her legs were bare, just shorts, knees streaked with dirt. No flashlight, no shoes. We all froze. Hey, are you okay? Milo said, standing slowly. She looked at us, head tilted a little. Calm. Not scared. Her voice was soft. Have you seen my brother? That's all she said. Derek started walking toward her, arms out a little like he didn't want to spook her. Where are your parents, sweetheart? Are you lost? But she turned and darted into the woods. No panic, no stumble, just disappeared between the trees. We grabbed headlamps and spread out, shouting, following the prints she left in the damp leaf litter. After 20 minutes, we gave up and called it in, hiked up the hill for a signal and reached the ranger station. 2 of them arrived in under an hour. We gave them everything we had, description, time, direction she ran. They combed the area for hours. Dogs came in around midnight, nothing. By morning, the lead ranger pulled us aside. No reports, he said. No missing kids in any of the surrounding counties. Closest report like that's from years ago. He didn't say it like he was brushing us off. He said it like he believed us and didn't know what to do with it. We went home the next day. Didn't say much on the drive. Milo kept replaying the moment in his head, wondering if we'd missed something obvious. A trail she might have come from. A car nearby, something. Derek said he'd check the GoPro footage. I didn't expect much. Maybe just the blur of her figure stepping into frame, some movement we could freeze and look at closer. He sent the clip to us 2 days later. No commentary. Just the file. I watched it on my laptop late at night, lights off, trying to see what he saw. And there she was. At 6:41 p.m., a figure walks into frame from the left side of the fire pit. A child, red hoodie, bare feet. She stops just inside the glow and turns slightly as if listening to Milo speak. You can see our tents. You can hear our voices faintly on the audio. And then, nothing. No running. No turn, no exit. The girl never walks out of frame. She enters, she stands, and then she's just not there anymore. Like a skipped frame, but there's no glitch. The camera keeps rolling, logs every second, just gone. We played it over and over, slowed it down, paused each frame. She's there, still quiet, eyes reflecting firelight. Then the next frame, the same angle, same timestamp. She's gone. Derek even sent it to a friend of his who works in editing. The guy said there's no cut, no drop in frames, no corruption in the file. Nothing technical to explain it. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found wet footprints on my back porch. Small, bare, just 2. As if someone stood there for a moment, looking in through the glass. I called Derek. He didn't pick up. Milo stopped answering texts a week later. I still have the footage. I still hear her voice sometimes. Not in dreams. I don't sleep long enough for that anymore. Just in the quiet moments. Between the hum of appliances or when the power cuts off during a storm. Have you seen my brother? I think about that question a lot. Not because of what she asked, but because of how she asked it. Like she wasn't looking for help. Like she already knew the answer. I'm not sure what drew us out there in the first place. Maybe it was the heat back home or the way work had been grinding me down to dust. Mason said he needed something with fog, and I agreed. So we picked a section of the Monongahela National Forest near Green Bank, West Virginia. The kind of place where the woods feel older than roads. It was late September. We parked on a rutted service road and hiked about 3 miles up into a ridgeline basin. No trail markings, just Mason's GPS and some notes he'd found on a backcountry hiking forum. Something about ruins and overlooks. We didn't find either, but we found the tree. It was off the ridge trail by maybe 40 yards. A massive pine, gnarled and split down the center. Not snapped, but naturally cleaved like lightning had tried to tear it in two. The hollow ran nearly 8 feet up the trunk, wide enough for a man to stand inside. The bark inside the gap was smooth, dark, and smelled. Strange, not like sap or rot, more like cold iron. Mason said, "That's got to be a couple 100 years old." I didn't say anything. Something about it made my scalp tighten. There were no other trees like it nearby. No birds in the branches. The ground around it was strangely bare, not cleared, just undisturbed. No ferns, no roots, no moss, just dry soil and brittle needles. I walked closer and felt this pressure. Like standing too near something running electricity but silent. We didn't camp right next to it. We set up about 100 yards away, just inside a grove of younger pines. I told Mason it was because the ground was flatter. He didn't question it. By sundown, fog had started settling into the hollow. It came in thin bands, low and cold. Everything smelled wet. Bark, soil, smoke from our small fire. It was around 11 p.m. when I first heard it. A soft wheezing. I sat up in my sleeping bag, ears straining. It was too rhythmic to be an animal, but too faint to place, like a breath being pushed through a narrow throat. Not gasping, just steady. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. I thought it was Mason snoring, but the sound was outside the tent. I opened the flap and stuck my head out. Mist curled low over the ground. The fire had died to coals. Mason was still zipped in, unmoving, but the sound was louder now. It came from the direction of the hollow pine. I listened for maybe a minute before zipping the flap shut and lying still. Didn't sleep much after that. Just stared at the fabric and tried to pretend the sound wasn't getting closer. We broke camp just after 5 a.m. No breakfast, no real conversation. Just the quiet shuffle of gear being stuffed into packs and the fire pit being buried. The mist hadn't lifted. It clung to our jackets and curled around our boots. Mason asked if I'd heard anything strange during the night. I said no. We passed the tree on the way back. I didn't look at it. Just kept walking, but Mason stopped. "You hear that?" he whispered. I didn't answer, because I heard it too, that same faint wheeze, almost like wind through a pipe, but thicker. Closer. It wasn't coming from the branches or the woods. It was coming from inside the hollow. We didn't speak again until we were back at the truck. That was 4 weeks ago. Since then, I haven't talked to Mason much. We text, but it's short stuff, surface level. I get the sense neither of us wants to talk about the tree. Last night I was scrolling through a private hiking group I follow on Facebook. Someone posted a wide-angle photo of a hollow pine in a foggy basin. Same area, same ridgeline, same cleaved trunk. It was the tree. The caption said, "Found this near Bear Hollow." Looks like one of the marker trees they use when campers go missing. I stared at it for a long time. There were comments, hikers asking what a marker tree was. Some old-timer replied that in certain search and rescue reports they use odd trees as landmarks during recoveries. No official protocol, just patterns that emerge. Someone else said, "I heard people camp near those trees and never come back." The post got buried by newer photos. But I saved the image. I zoomed in on the hollow. There was something carved inside the split, just barely visible. 3 parallel notches, stacked vertically. I don't remember seeing those before, but maybe they were always there. Maybe we were just too focused on the breathing. I haven't been back in the woods since, not because I'm afraid of getting lost, but because I'm not sure the tree wants me to find it again, and part of me thinks it already has.